My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and at 68 years old, I thought I understood pain. I thought I had already survived the worst life could offer a woman. I buried my husband when I was only 39. I raised my daughter alone while working jobs that slowly destroyed my body. I spent decades sacrificing my own dreams so my child would never feel the emptiness and fear that haunted me after becoming a widow. But nothing, not poverty, loneliness, or grief, prepared me for the humiliation I would face at my own daughter's wedding. My daughter Lily used to be my entire world. After her father died from a sudden heart attack, she became the reason I woke up every morning. I still remember sitting beside her tiny bed night after night while she cried herself to sleep asking when Daddy was coming home. She was only 11 years old, far too young to understand death. I promised her then that no matter how hard life became, I would always protect her. And I tried. God knows I tried. I worked double shifts at a nursing home during the day and cleaned office buildings at night. Some weeks I barely slept 4 hours a day. My hands became rough from chemicals and winter cold, but I never complained in front of Lily. I wanted her to grow up believing life could still be beautiful. There were nights when I pretended not to be hungry so she could have a full dinner. Christmas gifts came from overtime hours that nearly broke my back. Every school trip, every dance recital, every graduation ceremony, I was there smiling proudly, even when exhaustion burned through my bones. For many years, Lily appreciated everything. She used to hug me tightly and whisper, "One day I'll take care of you too, Mom." I believed her. Then she met Daniel Mercer. The first time I saw him, he arrived in a black luxury car wearing a suit more expensive than anything I had ever owned. He was handsome, polished, confident, the kind of man people instantly admire. His smile looked perfect, but something in his eyes made me uneasy. At first, Daniel acted respectful. He called me Mrs. Whitmore and brought flowers when visiting the house. But slowly, little cracks began to show. He would glance around my modest home with barely hidden disgust. "You still live here?" he once asked casually while looking at my old furniture. Another time he laughed softly when he saw my aging sedan parked outside. "Wow," he said to Lily. "I didn't know people still drove cars like that." Lily laughed awkwardly beside him, and although it seemed harmless, something about it hurt deeply. Over time, the comments became sharper. "Some people just aren't meant for high society. Success changes your standards. Old-fashioned people can hold you back." He never directly insulted me in front of others. Daniel was too clever for that. Instead, he wrapped cruelty inside politeness until everyone else could pretend not to notice. And the worst part? Lily slowly stopped defending me. Whenever Daniel made one of his comments, she would stay silent or change the subject. Sometimes she even agreed with him. It felt like watching my daughter slowly drift away from me while standing only a few feet apart. Still, I remained quiet. Because mothers endure things silently when they fear losing their children. When Lily announced their engagement, I forced myself to smile. I told her she looked happy, and that was all that mattered. But deep inside, I sensed something changing inside her, something colder, more distant. The wedding was planned at an expensive vineyard outside Napa Valley, the kind of place I had only seen in magazines. White roses covered the ceremony garden. Crystal chandeliers sparkled under elegant glass tents. Wealthy guests walked around carrying champagne while laughing about vacations in Europe and business investments. I felt painfully out of place the moment I arrived. I wore a simple navy blue dress I had saved money to buy months earlier. It wasn't designer. It wasn't glamorous. But I ironed it carefully 3 separate times that morning because I wanted Lily to feel proud to call me her mother. Instead, when she saw me, her smile faded for just a second. And in that moment, standing among strangers in expensive suits and diamond jewelry, a terrible feeling settled deep in my chest. I didn't know it yet, but my humiliation had already been planned. The ceremony itself was beautiful, at least on the surface. Soft violin music floated through the vineyard while golden evening sunlight covered the white rose garden in a warm glow. Guests smiled, cameras flashed, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to forget the uneasy feeling inside my chest. When Lily walked down the aisle in her wedding dress, tears filled my eyes. She looked absolutely radiant. In that moment, I didn't see the distant young woman she had become over the past few years. I saw my little girl again, the child who used to run into my arms after school and tell me every detail about her day. As she passed me, I smiled proudly, hoping she would smile back. But she barely looked at me. The small ache in my heart returned immediately. Still, I tried to ignore it. Weddings are emotional, I told myself. Maybe she was nervous. Maybe I was imagining things. After the ceremony ended, the guests moved into the enormous reception tent decorated with crystal chandeliers and expensive floral arrangements. Waiters carried silver trays filled with champagne, while a live jazz band played softly in the background. Everywhere I looked, people laughed and celebrated. But something felt wrong. I noticed Daniel whispering with his groomsmen while glancing toward me. A few bridesmaids giggled nervously whenever I walked past. Even Daniel's parents avoided speaking to me directly. Then came the speeches. Daniel stood confidently in the center of the room, holding a champagne glass, while the crowd applauded. He looked perfectly calm and charming, exactly the kind of man people admired instantly. At first, he began smoothly. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight to celebrate this beautiful new chapter in our lives. The guest smiled warmly. He thanked his parents for teaching him the value of success and class. Then he praised Lily for becoming the perfect partner to build a powerful future together. Something about his tone made me uncomfortable. Then suddenly, his eyes landed directly on me. And of course, he continued with a faint smile. Every success story also reminds us where we came from and what kind of life we should never return to. The room grew quiet. My stomach tightened. Daniel slowly walked across the reception floor while still speaking into the microphone. Some people spend their entire lives pretending they belong in places they were never meant to enter, he said casually. But no amount of pretending can truly hide where you come from. A few uncomfortable laughs echoed through the crowd. I felt heat rise into my face as guests slowly turned toward me. Daniel, I whispered softly, please stop. But he ignored me completely. Near the catering tables stood a large silver bucket filled with kitchen waste from the evening. Before I could understand what was happening, Daniel grabbed the handle and lifted it with both hands. The smell hit me instantly. Rotten food, spoiled alcohol, filthy garbage liquid. And then, he dumped the entire bucket over my head. The disgusting liquid soaked my hair, face, dress, and shoes. I gasped as cold, foul-smelling trash water dripped down my skin in front of hundreds of guests. The entire room erupted in shock. Some people screamed. Others covered their mouths in horror. But Daniel simply stared at me with satisfaction and said loudly into the microphone, finally, you got what you deserve. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood frozen in humiliation while guests whispered all around me. Somewhere nearby, I heard phones recording everything. But none of that hurt as much as looking toward my daughter. Lily stood beside her new husband completely silent. She didn't defend me. She didn't move toward me. She didn't even hand me a napkin. She just stood there and watched. And in that moment, my heart broke more completely than it had the day I buried my husband. For several long seconds, I stood completely frozen in the middle of the reception hall while filthy garbage water dripped from my hair onto the polished wooden floor. The smell of rotten food and alcohol surrounded me so heavily that I felt sick to my stomach. No one moved. The music had stopped. The entire room had fallen silent except for the faint sound of guests whispering to each other. I could feel hundreds of eyes staring at me. Some people looked horrified. Others looked uncomfortable. A few secretly held up their phones, recording my humiliation like entertainment. And standing only a few feet away, Daniel smiled proudly as if he had just performed something clever and amusing. But I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was looking at Lily. My daughter stood beside her husband in her beautiful white wedding dress, completely motionless. Tears filled my eyes as I silently begged her to say something, anything at all. I waited for her to scream at Daniel. I waited for her to run toward me. I waited for her to defend me the way daughters are supposed to defend their mothers. But she did nothing, not even a single word. That silence hurt more than the garbage water soaking through my clothes. Slowly, I bent down and picked up my purse from the floor. My hands trembled slightly, but I refused to cry in front of those people. I had spent my entire life surviving humiliation, poverty, and heartbreak. I would not allow them to see me collapse. Without saying a word, I turned and began walking toward the exit. The crowd quietly moved aside to let me pass. I could hear whispers following me through the reception tent. Oh my God, did you see that? That was cruel. Why didn't the daughter stop him? Each sentence cut deeper into my chest. As I walked past one of the mirrored walls near the entrance, I caught sight of myself. My carefully prepared navy blue dress was stained and dripping. My gray hair clung to my face, and pieces of food waste were stuck to my sleeves. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Outside, the evening air felt cold against my soaked skin. The sounds of the wedding became distant behind me as I slowly walked toward the parking area. My legs felt weak, and my chest ached so badly I thought I might collapse. I sat down alone on a small wooden bench near the edge of the vineyard and finally allowed myself to breathe. The tears came then. Not loud dramatic sobs, just quiet tears sliding silently down my face. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. How did we get here? How had the little girl I sacrificed everything for become someone capable of watching her mother be destroyed in public? A few minutes later, I heard slow footsteps approaching behind me. Mrs. Whitmore? I looked up and saw an older man standing nearby. It was Charles Bennett, Daniel's grandfather. Unlike the rest of the Mercer family, Charles had always treated me with kindness and respect. Tonight, however, his face looked filled with anger. I am deeply sorry for what happened in there, he said quietly. I quickly wiped my tears and forced a weak smile. It's all right. I should probably just go home. No, Charles replied firmly. What Daniel did was disgraceful, and what your daughter allowed was even worse. His words hit painfully because they were true. Charles sat down beside me for a moment before reaching into his jacket pocket and handing me a small business card. I need you to come see me tomorrow morning, he said seriously. I frowned in confusion. Why? He hesitated briefly before answering. Because there are things about this marriage you don't know. A cold feeling spread through my chest. The look in Charles's eyes wasn't pity. It was concern. And suddenly, for the first time that night, I realized something even more disturbing than public humiliation might be hiding beneath everything that had happened. The next morning, I drove to Charles Bennett's estate with a heavy feeling in my chest. I barely slept the entire night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel lifting that bucket and Lily standing silently beside him. Charles lived in a large historic mansion on the outskirts of the city, far from the luxury and noise of the wedding venue. When the housekeeper led me into his private office, I immediately noticed the serious expression on his face. Thank you for coming, Eleanor, he said quietly. I sat down across from him, clutching my purse nervously. Please just tell me why this happened. What did I ever do to deserve that? Charles sighed deeply before opening a folder on his desk. You did nothing wrong, he said firmly. Daniel's behavior had nothing to do with you personally. This was about money. I stared at him in confusion. Charles slid several legal documents toward me. Daniel is not as wealthy as he pretends to be. The Mercer family business has been collapsing for years under hidden debt. Investors are pulling out. Loans are overdue. They're desperate. My stomach tightened. But what does that have to do with Lily? I asked softly. Charles hesitated for a moment before answering. Because your daughter is about to inherit something extremely valuable. I frowned. I don't understand. Then Charles revealed something that left me speechless. Years before my husband died, he secretly purchased several acres of undeveloped land outside the city. At the time, the property was nearly worthless, and after his death, legal complications buried the ownership records for decades. But recently, a massive technology company began buying property in the area for a new development project. Overnight, that forgotten land became worth millions of dollars. My hands trembled as I stared at the paperwork. I didn't even know the legal process had finished, I whispered. It finalized 2 weeks ago, Charles replied grimly. Daniel somehow found out about the inheritance before the wedding. A cold wave of realization swept through me. The sudden engagement. Daniel's forced politeness. The expensive wedding. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. He married Lily for the money, I whispered. Charles lowered his eyes sadly. Yes. Tears burned behind my eyes, but the next words hurt even more. And Eleanor, he continued carefully, Lily knew. The room suddenly felt impossible to breathe in. No, I whispered immediately. No, my daughter would never. But deep inside, I already feared the truth. Charles looked at me with genuine sorrow. The humiliation at the wedding wasn't impulsive, he said quietly. It was planned. Daniel wanted to publicly separate Lily from what he called her poor family background before gaining access to the inheritance. I felt my heart crack all over again. Not because of Daniel, But because my daughter had allowed it to happen, I left Charles Bennett's estate feeling numb. The entire drive home passed in silence, except for the sound of my own thoughts tearing me apart. I wanted to believe Charles was wrong. I wanted to believe my daughter had been manipulated or pressured by Daniel. But deep down, painful memories were beginning to connect together. The ignored phone calls, the canceled visits, the way Lily slowly stopped inviting me into her life. It hadn't happened overnight. She had been drifting away from me for years. When I arrived home, I sat alone at my kitchen table staring at old family photographs spread across the surface. In every picture, Lily smiled beside me proudly. Birthday parties, school graduations, Christmas mornings. We had once been inseparable. So when had I become someone she was ashamed of? Late that evening, my phone finally rang. It was Lily. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen while my heart pounded painfully in my chest. Part of me wanted to ignore the call completely, but I answered. Mom, her voice sounded shaky. Can we talk? I closed my eyes. Talk about what, Lily? There was a long silence before she spoke again. Daniel went too far yesterday. Not I'm sorry. Not I should have stopped him. Just, Daniel went too far. Something inside me hardened at that moment. You stood there and watched, I said quietly. I didn't know he was actually going to do it, she whispered defensively. He said it was supposed to be a joke. A joke. The word felt like poison. He humiliated me in front of hundreds of people, I replied. And you said nothing. Lily started crying softly on the phone, but her tears no longer affected me the same way they once had. Mom, you don't understand how hard things have been, she said. Daniel's family expects a certain image. They think you make us look. She stopped speaking, but I already knew the word she couldn't say. Poor, embarrassing, unworthy. The silence between us felt unbearable. Then Lily spoke again, more quietly this time. Daniel says once the inheritance comes through, everything will settle down. We can all move forward. My stomach turned cold. There it was. Not regret. Not love. Money. In that moment, every remaining illusion shattered completely. My daughter wasn't calling because she felt guilty about humiliating me. She was calling because they still needed access to my inheritance. Tears filled my eyes, but for the first time in my life, they weren't tears of heartbreak. They were tears of awakening. I finally understood something painful but necessary. Some people stop seeing a mother as family once they start seeing her as an obstacle. And for the first time, I realized I needed to stop protecting Lily from the consequences of her own choices. Over the next several days, Lily called me constantly. At first, she left emotional voicemails filled with tears and apologies. Then Daniel began sending polite text messages asking if we could move forward as a family. The sudden kindness felt almost laughable after everything they had done. But I understood exactly why they were contacting me now. The inheritance records had officially become public. They knew the land my late husband purchased decades earlier was now worth millions. And suddenly, the mother they publicly humiliated had become important again. For the first time in years, however, I stopped reacting emotionally. Instead of crying or begging for answers, I quietly listened, observed, and prepared myself carefully. Because while Daniel had spent years underestimating me, he forgot something important. Women who survive hardship learn how to think quietly before they act. A week after the wedding, I finally agreed to meet them for dinner at my house. That evening, I prepared the dining table exactly the way I used to when Lily was young. Clean plates, warm food, candles softly glowing in the kitchen. To anyone looking from outside, we probably appeared like an ordinary family trying to heal after conflict. But beneath the silence, tension filled every corner of the room. Lily arrived first. Her eyes looked swollen from crying, and she avoided meeting my gaze directly. Daniel entered behind her carrying an expensive bottle of wine and wearing the same polished smile he used to charm everyone around him. Mrs. Whitmore, he said smoothly, thank you for giving us another chance to talk. I simply nodded. Dinner began awkwardly. Lily tried forcing small conversation, while Daniel acted unusually respectful. He complimented my cooking, asked about my health, and pretended the wedding humiliation had been nothing more than a terrible misunderstanding. Then, eventually, the real reason for the visit appeared. Daniel gently placed down his wine glass and leaned forward. So, he said carefully, have you thought about what you'll do with the inheritance? There it was. Straight to the point. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. What exactly do you mean? Daniel smiled politely. Well, family assets should stay within the family. Lily and I were thinking it might be wise to transfer everything into a shared trust. It would protect everyone financially. I looked at Lily. She remained silent. Not once did she say, "Mom, keep it for yourself. Mom, you earned this." Instead, she simply waited for my answer. The pain inside my chest remained, but now it mixed with clarity. Slowly, I stood up from the table and walked toward the nearby cabinet drawer. Inside was a thick folder of legal paperwork I had finalized 3 days earlier with the help of my attorney. I placed the documents directly in front of Daniel. He frowned while opening them. Then his face lost all color. "What is this?" he asked sharply. "It's final," I replied calmly. "Every asset connected to the inheritance has been transferred into a permanent charitable foundation." Lily's eyes widened in shock. "A foundation?" she whispered. I nodded slowly. "The money will be used to support widows, abandoned mothers, and struggling single women." Daniel immediately slammed the papers onto the table. "You gave it away?" he snapped. For the first time since the wedding, I looked directly into his eyes without fear. "Yes," I said quietly, "because people who publicly humiliate their own family deserve absolutely nothing from me." For several seconds, complete silence filled the dining room. Daniel stared at the legal papers spread across the table as if he could somehow force the words to change. His calm, polished image cracked instantly, revealing the anger underneath. "You can't be serious," he said sharply. "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied calmly. Lily looked pale. "Mom, why would you do this?" I almost laughed at the question. Why? After everything that had happened, my own daughter still didn't understand. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up from the table. "Because I finally realized something important," I said quietly. "You both stopped seeing me as family a long time ago. To you, I became nothing more than a bank account." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous." "No," I interrupted firmly. "What's ridiculous is believing you could publicly humiliate me at my daughter's wedding and still expect access to my husband's life savings." For the first time, Daniel completely dropped the fake politeness. "You old woman," he snapped angrily. "Do you even realize what you've done? That money could have saved our future." I stared at him without fear. "No," I answered softly. "It would have rewarded your cruelty." Lily burst into tears. "Mom, please, we made mistakes." Mistakes. Such a small word for something that shattered a lifetime of trust. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated loudly on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen and saw several incoming notifications, all arriving at once. Then another, and another. Confused, I unlocked the phone. My heart skipped. The wedding video had been leaked online. Not the edited version Daniel originally planned to release, but the full, uncut footage. Every horrifying second was there. Daniel insulting me in front of the guests. The garbage water pouring over my head. The shocked reactions from the crowd. And Lily standing silently beside him while it happened. Someone had uploaded everything. Within hours, the video had already spread across social media. Millions of people were watching. Daniel immediately grabbed his own phone. The color drained from his face as he scrolled through endless comments. "This can't be happening," he muttered. But it was happening. The internet reacted with outrage. News pages began reposting clips of the wedding humiliation, calling it one of the cruelest public family betrayals people had ever seen. Comments flooded every platform. How could a daughter allow this? That poor mother sacrificed everything for her child. This man is disgusting. Daniel's business reputation collapsed almost overnight. Several of his investors publicly distanced themselves from him. Clients canceled. Contracts. One company released a statement announcing they were reviewing their professional relationship with him after the video surfaced. The Mercer family name, once obsessed with appearing powerful and respected, suddenly became associated with cruelty and greed. And for the first time since the wedding, Daniel looked afraid. Real consequences had finally arrived. Lily sat at my kitchen table, crying uncontrollably while reading the comments online. Thousands of strangers criticized her silence during the humiliation. "Mom," she whispered through tears. "Everyone hates me." I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "No, Lily," I said quietly. "They're reacting to your choices." The room fell silent again. For years, I had protected my daughter from pain. I excused her behavior, ignored the warning signs, and convinced myself she would eventually find her way back to me. But that night, something changed inside me completely. I no longer felt weak. I no longer felt ashamed. The humiliation that nearly destroyed me had exposed the truth for everyone to see, including myself. And ironically, the moment Daniel tried hardest to make me feel worthless became the exact moment he destroyed his own life instead. As Daniel sat there staring helplessly at his collapsing world, I finally understood something powerful. Cruelty may impress people temporarily, but eventually, character reveals itself. And when it does, no amount of money, status, or expensive appearances can protect the people who built their lives on humiliation and greed. It has been nearly 2 years since the day my daughter's wedding changed all of our lives forever. Sometimes people ask me if I regret giving the inheritance away instead of keeping it for myself. The answer is always simple: no. For the first time in decades, I wake up every morning feeling peaceful. The charitable foundation created in my husband's name has helped hundreds of women rebuild their lives after betrayal, abandonment, and financial hardship. We help widows pay rent, single mothers return to school, and elderly women avoid losing their homes after being discarded by family members. Every time I see one of those women smile again, I know I made the right choice. Pain that once nearly destroyed me became something useful instead. As for Daniel Mercer, his world collapsed far faster than anyone expected. The wedding video never disappeared from the internet. Even now, people still recognize his face online as the groom who humiliated his mother-in-law. His business partnerships vanished one after another. Investors refused to trust him. Companies quietly cut ties to protect their own reputations. Within a year, the Mercer family was forced to sell several luxury properties to cover mounting debts. In the end, the man who mocked me for being poor lost nearly everything himself. And Lily? That part of the story is much harder for me to tell. About 8 months after the wedding scandal, she filed for divorce from Daniel. According to Charles Bennett, the marriage became toxic almost immediately after the inheritance disappeared. Without money to chase, Daniel's charm faded quickly. The same cruelty he once aimed at me eventually turned toward Lily. One rainy evening, she appeared unexpectedly at my front door. She looked exhausted. Her expensive clothes were gone. The confident image she once tried so hard to maintain had completely disappeared. For a moment, standing there in silence, she looked like the frightened little girl I used to hold after nightmares. "Mom," she whispered softly, "I'm sorry." 3 words. Words I once desperately wanted to hear. But forgiveness is complicated after betrayal. I invited her inside anyway. We sat together quietly at the kitchen table for nearly an hour before either of us spoke again. Lily cried as she admitted everything. How Daniel slowly convinced her that wealth and social status mattered more than family. How embarrassed she became of our modest life, and how terrified she was of losing the luxurious future Daniel promised her. "I thought if I stood beside him," she said through tears, "everything would finally feel secure." I listened silently. Then I asked the question that had haunted me since the wedding. "Why didn't you stop him?" Lily broke down completely. "I was afraid," she whispered. "And by the time it happened, I hated myself too much to move." Her answer shattered something inside me because I finally realized the truth. Daniel didn't destroy my daughter alone. Lily allowed herself to become someone she no longer recognized. Healing between us has been slow since then. Some wounds never fully disappear, no matter how much love remains underneath them. We speak occasionally now. Sometimes we have dinner together. Sometimes she helps at the foundation. But things are different. Trust, once broken deeply enough, never returns in exactly the same form. Still, I've learned something important through all of this. A person's true character reveals itself, not during success, but during moments when they believe they hold power over someone weaker. Daniel believed humiliating me would elevate him. Instead, it exposed the ugliness inside him for the entire world to see. And me? I survived. Not because I became cruel. Not because I sought revenge. But because I finally understood that dignity is something nobody can take from you unless you surrender it yourself. That wedding day nearly broke my heart. But in the end, it also gave me something I never expected to find at 68 years old: my voice.